Hello friends, today we're going to discuss the importance of planning for a crisis in parenting plans. Remember that these unexpected crises, whether they be a natural disaster like a hurricane, flood, earthquake, or wildfire. They may be a health emergency, either on a local or national level, like a flu outbreak or a pandemic. They may even be an unexpected travel restriction because of civil strife or some sort of military operation. All of these crises can throw a huge wrench into a parent's time-sharing schedule. Remember that these unforeseen events or crises, they can disrupt time-sharing exchanges, the safety of children, and the ability of the parents to follow the court-ordered or agreed-to time-sharing schedule. Therefore, it is extremely crucial for the parents to pre-plan and think about how the custody arrangements will be during a crisis prior to the crisis, because if they don't, they're going to be running around in the midst or middle of a crisis trying to figure out what to do, and that is not good for anyone. So stay tuned for this important information. Welcome back to the Divorce Broadcast. My name is Manny Segarra, coming to you from Miami, Florida. All right, so let's jump right into our discussion on how to properly account for a crisis in parenting plans. Remember, we don't have to think too far back in terms of the last time a big crisis affected us on a national or international level. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the entire world at some point or another was on lockdown. Here in the United States, it became difficult for some parents to follow their agreed-to time-sharing schedule because of the health risks that were involved. Also, it doesn't have to rise to the level of a global pandemic. Here in Florida, we are always struck by hurricanes. I think there's been about 4 or 5 that have hit Florida this past year. On a personal story, during 2017, when Hurricane Irma hit, a huge chunk of a tree went through and pierced my roof, and there was a huge hole in my roof, and it became an issue with time-sharing exchanges for my son. Remember, if parties or if parents are smart enough to have a plan in place when there's a crisis, it would make things between them when it comes to time sharing and exchanging the children a lot smoother. Now, let's get into some of the key considerations that should be thought about or included in parenting plans when addressing or in the middle of a crisis. One of the most important keys is emergency communications. Remember that communicating in a clear and reliable way is crucial during a crisis. Parenting plans should have separate provisions as to how parents will communicate with each other and communicate with the children during a crisis. Some additional provisions should include emergency clause or an emergency plan that specifies when and how often each parent will communicate with the other about the children's safety or their location or how it is that they are doing in the middle of an emergency or crisis. The next consideration has to do with temporary custody. Specifically, parenting plans should allow for a little bit of flexibility to the custody schedule in the event of an emergency or crisis, not allowing for the regular time-sharing schedule to occur. Provisions of the parenting plan should also articulate which parent is going to have temporary custody of the children in the event of a natural disaster. Is it going to be the parent that is closer to the natural disaster, or will it be the parent who is a little bit further away and perhaps a little bit safer? There should be provisions about a health crisis, meaning if the child is sick or if the children are sick, they will stay with the parent who currently has custody of the children so that that parent can nurse them back to health. The parenting plan can also decide what will happen in the event of one of the parents not being able to exercise time sharing or visitation during a natural disaster, crisis, or some sort of health emergency. There may be provisions for that parent to be able to see the children on a different date or for make-up time sharing. The next key consideration has to do with the children's safety provisions. Specifically, in the event of a crisis or some sort of emergency, the parents need to make the children's safety the top priority. So there should be provisions in the parenting plan that set forth certain safety protocols depending upon the crisis or emergency. For example, if there is a natural disaster, the parenting plan should indicate which parent the children will stay with. It could have language that says that if someone's house gets damaged, then the children will stay with the other parent. Or maybe it'll indicate that whichever parent is furthest away from the flood or the fire or the hurricane, they will have temporary custody of the children. There should also be a plan or language in place regarding health emergencies. Like, remember the 2019 COVID pandemic? This language should indicate which parent will have temporary custody of the children in the event of, let's say, one of the parents has more exposure to a virus or pandemic than the other. And then the parenting plan can indicate that the children will stay with the other parent. Or if the children are sick and they have a flu, some sort of illness in which they cannot go to school, then the parenting plan should include that the children will stay with the parent that's currently trying to nurse them back to health. And once they get better, they will engage in the regular time sharing schedule. There should also be provisions about what to do with school during a crisis or an emergency. Will the children attend school? Will they stay home and perhaps be enrolled in a remote learning program? The parenting plan should also consider evacuation plans or shelter locations, or even which parent will take the lead in these types of emergencies or crises. All of this is so important for the parents to consider before the actual crisis takes place. Another very important consideration to take into account is temporary decision-making authority. In most parenting plans, the parties have either joint custody or shared parental responsibility, where they're required to confer and agree to all decisions relating to the children, including medical treatment. However, if there is a crisis or an emergency, it may be worth it for the parties to consider putting language in their parenting plans that allows for either one of them to make emergency decisions regarding the children. It is so important in the event of an emergency or crisis, if the children need medical treatment or to evacuate or to live in some sort of temporary housing, for the parents to try to discuss and figure out if they can each have that decision-making authority on an emergency or temporary basis during a crisis. And the last point we'll make, or the last key consideration that at least we'll go over, is that there should be provisions for make-up time sharing once the emergency or crisis is over. Remember, this is all about flexibility. And during an emergency or crisis, the parents will have to be flexible with each other. And let's say that one of the parents had to take temporary custody of the children. Well, the parenting plan should have provisions as to how make-up time sharing will occur if there's an emergency or crisis. The parenting plan should set forth, maybe they'll say day for day, that whatever day for day the parent missed because of the crisis, they'll get it back, but maybe it'll be exercised over the summer or during a time period in which the children, their regular schedule won't be affected. Regardless of what the arrangement is, it is so important for the parents to talk about this, because that way there will be less hesitation to try to make the children have to go back and forth during time sharing during a crisis or emergency. So this is a very important provision. All right, so before we wrap up, I'll just say that planning for an emergency or crisis in a parenting plan may seem overwhelming, but it is imperative so that the parties don't feel stressed out and confused and disoriented when the unexpected happens. No one knew that a pandemic was going to hit us and last for several years and upend our society. No one can predict when hurricanes or floods or wildfires or earthquakes occur. So the parents, in order to make sure that their children's best interests are paramount and that their safety above all else is taken care of, it is important for them to discuss how to manage a crisis or emergency in their parenting plans. All right, so that's a wrap on our video on how to address a crisis or emergency in parenting plans. If you know anyone that might find this information useful, have them look us up at www.segarralawfirm.com. We have offices in Miami and Orlando, Florida. Se habla español. Please do us a favor and like this video, subscribe to the Divorce Broadcast, and we will see you soon. Thank you.